So what do we think? Am I good without the microphone?
Yeah.
You guys can hear me. I'm loud. All right, I'm going to turn this off. Yeah, here we go. All right, and we should have our presentation getting loaded. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having me. We got a great crowd here tonight. Thank you to Bob and Carolyn and Juliana and all the other members of the XCOM and the Sierra Club for inviting me here today. Appreciate the opportunity. And as Bob mentioned, I work very closely with the Lone Star chapter of the Sierra Club on a lot of the things that I do, including the legislature, which although it is 8 months away, is already starting to rear its head in our lives. So, let's see, we got a cup here. We're gonna move this up. All right, I'm gonna click this thing. It's gonna go forward, and then I'm gonna click it, and it's gonna go backwards. All right, we're good. So, how much time do I have? It is 7:11. What do we got? Like 10 minutes.
Yeah,
45 minutes. Done introducing myself. 45 minutes, including Q&A.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
We're not real strict.
All right. We're not going to keep you here all night. I'll probably talk for like, I don't know, 25 minutes or so, maybe a little more, and then we'll just have conversation. But I would much prefer if we kind of pepper the conversation in. I'm perfectly capable of rambling for a half hour. But if you have questions or comments and you want to raise your hand or just shout out since it's kind of dark, I am happy to stop and answer questions, have dialogue as we're going. That is just fine with me. But let's jump into it. So, again, my name is Adrian Shelley. I'm the Texas Director of Public Citizen. We're the one state office of the organization. Public Citizen's mission is to be the voice of the people in the halls of power. And there are about 9 of us here in Texas doing that work. We mostly work on energy, electricity, climate, environmental justice, fossil fuels, clean energy transition, those kinds of things. And all of that has brought us into this data center space and has led us to become one of the founders of the wonderfully named Texas Data Center Rebellion. It's a great group. There are 4 organizations that share credit for founding it, along with Media Justice, Climate Justice Alliance, and Texas Youth Power Alliance. You can find us on Instagram there at Texas Data Center Rebellion. Here's our convening in San Antonio. There I am, very enthusiastic in the back. We met at the end of March, the first ever statewide convening of data center opponents. Howdy. So why now? Data centers have been in Texas for 20 years. Why is there so much opposition now? And I gotta tell you, if you had told me 30 years ago that my job would be fighting building-sized computers for water and energy, I would have thought, something like this, right? But that is what I do. And it's because, I'm gonna advance, come on, Terminator. Oh, we're stuck on the Terminator. This is frightening. Technology has betrayed me. There we go. All right. The expansion of this industry in the state is frightening. Yes. There are already about 600 data centers in the state. This is not a new industry, right? But the projections in just the next couple of years are absolutely insane. We heard from PUC Chairman Gleason and the House State Affairs Committee interim hearing last week that there are 410 gigawatts of large loads in ERCOT's interconnection queue. That's about 4 Texases, right? So there are 4 Texases worth of demand from data centers in the queue, right? Well, actually, that's all large loads. 87% of that is data centers, right? Now, nobody believes that all of that is going to get built. There's sort of a tacit, if not explicit, acknowledgement that here, right, that many of these projects are fantasy. We'll talk about some of them in a little bit, but that's the forecast, right? So it's frightening. It is an industry that is just barnstorming the state, and am I pushing the right button? It seems to. All right, there we go. All right, this is gonna continue to be a problem. There we go. All right. And this is all happening in a context where we are resource strapped in this state, right? Energy prices are going up. We got a great report from our friends at TEPRI, the Texas Energy Poverty Research Institute, recently. There's a laser pointer on here somewhere. Whatever, this is too. Oh no, I turned it off. What I do? All right. Well, if there were a slide, and if I was showing you a graph, then it would show you that energy prices have increased by 30% in the last 5 years, and they are projected to increase another 29% in the next 5 years. Yeah, I killed it. I pushed the kill button. Look, there's the bring it back button. All right, there we go. Look at that. There's a kill and a bring it back to life button. All right, there is, however, not a laser pointer that I can actually find. Wait, look at that. All right, here's our 30% in the last 5 years, 29% in the next 5 years. And some of that is driven by demand. By the way, my presentation is interspersed with lovely photos of people around the state opposing data centers. I'm not going to explain all of them, but there's my beautiful wife and child right there. So,
kept it in the family.
if you have seen presentations from me a couple of years ago, you heard me talking about how it was crypto energy that's driving up energy prices. We're going to use an old study about crypto, which is going to say about AI data centers. Same effect that we're going to see here. The researchers at Texas A&M found that just 1 gigawatt of additional demand could increase prices by 2%, right? There was another study from the New York Times a couple of years ago. It was looking at the time, there was just 1.8 gigawatts of crypto, not a lot compared to the 410 gigawatts that is projected, but that was increasing electricity bills by 5%, right? So just a couple of gigawatts of demand from crypto a few years ago was already causing a measurable increase in energy prices, right? So we've got an energy shortage. There's some folks out in Lockhart last week. And we've got a water shortage, right? We are in a water crisis. We've got the city of Corpus Christi running out of water by the end of the year. We've got a state water plan, though, right? Surely we've accounted for all of this growth. No, there's no data centers mentioned in the state water plan whatsoever, right? A lot has changed in 2 years, right? This plan is 4 years old. We weren't thinking about this industry 4 years ago the way that we are now, right? So we're in the middle of a water crisis. There are a number of good publications that have come out already on water rights and data centers. I'll refer you to both the Hill Country Alliance's report and the Houston Advanced Research Center, which counted 25 billion gallons of water use from this industry up through 2025, right? So we got an energy shortage, we've got a water shortage, and a few of these slides I borrowed from my colleague, Rita Bevan. She is giving a talk at this very moment to the Fort Worth article. So we traded some slides and things. So you're going to see a few slides that look like hers. What this is telling you, and I'm not going to read all these tiny words, and you shouldn't either, but what this is telling you is that some data centers use a whole lot of water, on the order of millions of gallons. Some data centers only use a little bit of water. The industry is representing that, the millions of gallons a day facility is the old model, and there's just none of those anymore. And they all use 20,000 gallons a year or something at this point, right? There may be some truth in some of those, but we really don't know because a lot of these facilities have just come online. We haven't seen, a year or a couple of years of water use out of it. There are also trade-offs, right? There's water intensive. Was that a question in the back there?
I was trying to ask about water regulations. We've got 2 members of the Water and Wastewater Commission in here. And so our regulations or requirements for local type of gray water are triggered by the square footage of the facility. If you're over 250,000 square feet, you have to have gray water or local type of right now. Should we be using a different metric? Should we be cutting them off at a certain point? Like, is there guidance out there?
Yeah, fine question. So the question, I'll paraphrase, was about water use regulations. Are the appropriate regulations about using reclaimed water going to work here? Do we need new regulations? First of all, that threshold, 250,000 square feet, that designates you as a large data center under state law. Large data centers are 250,000 square feet. They have 40 jobs. This is not a big employer. And they represent about $500 million of investment. So that's a very big data center. I want to say right now there's on the order of about, I don't know, maybe 50 to 70 that are that scale, right? I do not know a ton about water. We should probably be asking Alex.
Well,
but,
and that,
go ahead.
I mean, not that we're just gonna continue earlier conversations, but that only applies in the city, right, in the Austin Water Service, or in the Austin Water Service area?
I think it's just the Austin Water Service, so there are, like, for example, Tesla is outside the city limits, is on Austin Water. And it's, you know, the parameters of that.
Right. No, well, that makes sense, and of course, we know now that there's also a movement, larger than what's happening at the city level for these large entities that pop up, even within Austin Water Service area, to sort of build the ETJ, the extraterritorial jurisdiction, and then sort of remove themselves afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, the other places, thing that they're doing is that reclaimed water is expensive. Right? So they're trying to create incentive for everybody to opt in, but I'm just very skeptical.
Well, this is a very Austin Water centric view that we're talking about.
Well, and many of these facilities have represented that they will be able to use reclaimed water. Some of them are even starting to talk about using produced wastewater from oil and gas industry. But you had a question. Go ahead.
No, I didn't have
A comment.
I live in the ETJ, and what they've done to avoid it all is just come right over the border into our county and take all of it.
So there is that whack-a-mole problem, right? And this slide is just pointing out, right, if you're not in a municipal water area, maybe you're in a county with groundwater conservation district, those cover about 70% of the state. So you're going to get some ability there, to allocate water rights. But as we'll see, that is limited. Here is another nice little the folks out with the Data Center Action Coalition in San Marcos, a really excellent and inspiring group. If you haven't seen Data Center Action Coalition, check them out. There's the Axelo, he wants water. And in fact, San Marcos defeated the data center in February, right? There's a slide later here that shows out on the lawn outside of their city council, they had hundreds of people because there were so many people who showed up to the city council vote on the data center in February, and they won that vote. So cities have the most authority, right, basically of any jurisdiction, local government entity to stop a data center through zoning, right, through the planning and zoning commissions, right? So if you can get your city planning and zoning commission to deny the appropriate zoning, you can defeat the facility. There's a couple of examples of that happening, right? Athens and Fort Worth, both of these are last week, right?
Wow.
We joke that there's 3 pieces of news every day on data centers in Texas, right? There are some cities that have taken even more aggressive approaches. Out in Hood County, the folks in Granbury, just south of Fort Worth, their city approved a facility over the objections of citizens, and they filed suit asserting violations of the Open Meetings Act. So there were some notices that were done improperly. There was an address that was wrong. And if you know anything about the Open Meetings Act, if you make mistakes in public notice, you can get your project essentially kicked all the way back to the beginning of the process. So there's a lawsuit now with folks in Granbury. This is just over the approval of one data center. Granbury has several that are already built and in the works. Here's another example. This is Temple, Texas. This is tomorrow. They are voting on a facility, and you can see this is a common sentiment is there's a data center in my community. There's 9 data centers in my community. What? That's what would happen with us in Round Rock is people learned about a data center, they looked into it, and they found out it was the 9th one in the community. Again, this is an industry that's been around for a long time. It's its scale and the ferocity with which it's coming into the state that has finally attracted people's attention. There's that standing room only outside San Marcos from a couple of weeks ago. So the cities have planning and zoning authority. Counties are extremely limited in what they could do, right? There was an effort a couple of weeks ago in both Hood and Hayes counties to consider basically blanket moratoriums on large data center developments. In the case of Hayes County, it's going to be a restriction on large water facilities or facilities that use a lot of water. And in the case of Hood County, it's just going to be a moratorium on data centers. And Senator Paul Betancourt, whose position in Houston, very far away from Granbury, thought that it was important that he send a letter to the folks out there basically saying, you county lack any authority to regulate development, and if you try, we will ask the Attorney General to sue you. And he's probably right about this, right? There is also a law that he passed that prevents cities from imposing their own development moratoria. And in both cases, Hood County, it's totally going to work. They're pointing at the right thing. Come on, bud. No. Gave up. The little light is coming.
I can do it.
Sure. Let's advance the slide. Yes. All right. This thing is
Temperamental.
Yeah, it's temperamental. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So both counties, Hood and Hayes, backed away. They basically said, we want to do this, but we know we're going to get sued, and this isn't where we want to spend our taxpayer resources defending a lawsuit we're probably going to lose. So in both cases, they backed away.
So in other words, like if Austin City Council wanted to sue, they couldn't because they might lose.
So the question was, well, what about Austin City Council? Could they sue? This was specifically on the question of whether a county, or in that case, citywide moratorium against an issue would pass muster with state law. And Jared Patterson and Paul Betancourt will tell you no, in neither case, city nor county, could they just do a blanket moratorium. We'll take a look at what one county is doing, again in Hood County, we're still in Granbury. They actually have some explicit authority granted to them under Local Government Code 231. It basically says, Granbury, you can regulate development in order to protect the recreational value of Lake Granbury and the Brazos River. So they have this explicit grant of authority under Chapter 231. There's about half a dozen counties that have some explicit authority for some reason. And it requires a new development in the county to submit a development concept plan. And Granbury does have the authority under this statute to reject that concept plan. Now, the question is, what if they just reject every single concept plan for every single data center and have a de facto moratorium in place? All that, we're going to write another letter? Probably. We'll see, right? But what they are doing is they're sending a signal to the legislature that they need something to happen. There is me out in Round Rock. There's another one of my children right there. Another approach that counties are taking is they are forming what are called 391 commissions, Chapter 391 commissions. And initially, when I heard about this, it sounded like a great option. It's going to give the county more authority to negotiate with the PUC. They can band together with another county and come up with a regional strategy. I looked into it and I read the statutes, and really all it allows the county to do is develop a regional plan that's like an aspirational plan, right? It's kind of like, like a regional transportation plan that a COG would produce, right? It doesn't actually give the county any authority to implement the plan by, say, restricting development. It does, in the case of the PUC, require negotiation between the commission and the PUC. So that is happening. There's a couple of counties, Somerville, Hood, and ERAF counties are all variously in parts of these 391 commissions. So we will see in the coming months whether counties that are negotiating through these commissions have any more luck than otherwise. County resolutions, this is the first one that's actually been passed. In Cameron County, it doesn't say we want a moratorium. It says we can't support new development without proper oversight. We want safeguards, grid, energy, infrastructure. We want reporting. We want sustainability standards. It basically kind of expresses a rosy picture of how development could happen if we were doing the sorts of things in Texas that we don't like doing, like, resource management. Right? But again, these county resolutions are sending signals to the legislature that something needs to happen. And that's what lawmakers say that they need, right? If I were legislating around this industry in a couple of months, the first thing I would do is cut the state sales and use tax exemption. There was an excellently timed article from the Texas Tribune, came out the day before the state affairs hearing last week, that pointed out that last year we gave away $1 billion in tax exemptions to the data center industry. This is a list of those facilities. It's about 141 facilities in the state right now that are getting this exemption. It's on their equipment, their electricity, building costs, all kinds of things. And you can see here are the stats to qualify. Notice again, I said this earlier, large is just 40 jobs, right? $500 million of investment. That strikes me as a lot of money. But 40 jobs for one of these facilities, not that big, right? They don't employ that many people. So the Texas Tribune did some math and told us we were going to spend $1.3 billion, then 1.6, and on in the next couple of years. Tax exemptions are intended to attract an industry into the state. And when we have so many data centers already coming into the state, we need to build 4 Texases more worth of electricity just to accommodate them. I would say we've accomplished that goal, right? We probably don't need the tax exemption anymore. I think there's an excellent chance we're going to get this thing cut. And the first opportunity we're going to have to talk about that is here at the end of July. There's a Senate Finance Committee hearing. Our friend and colleague Cyrus Reed will be there, I'm sure. I will be there. We will be talking about the cost and consequences of the sales tax exemption. I would encourage you guys to maybe come to that too. So I would cut the state sales and use tax exemption. There are also local tax exemptions. These are costing the state tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. It is not easy to put an exact dollar figure on it, but let me just point out a couple of examples of the kinds of local tax breaks we see. First of all is the school board. This is the former Chapter 313 program. It's now called JEDI, the Jobs, Energy, Technology, and Innovation Act. And when a school district passes one of these, it is required to consider it in a public meeting. Might be a one-off meeting, might be at a school board meeting itself, but it is required by law to discuss this in a public meeting. So pay attention to your local school board. If you know there's a data center in your community, you look for that school board tax break.
There's also a requirement for 15 days of notice.
Thank you. Yes. It is a 30-day process. The school board has 30 days within receipt of the application to approve or disapprove it, and there is that 15-day notice period in there.
Hey, more than 30 days.
Oh, yeah, is that right? Oh, okay.
At least in my experience with Exxon and Calhoun County.
Okay, right on. I need to reread the statute. So you got your school board option, and then you've got your local city and county options. There's Chapter 312. That's along with TERSs, the tax reinvestment zones. It's usually like geographically based, like location based. We have seen more data centers in this program, local development agreements for Chapter 331 program. Unfortunately, some of these programs have public processes, some of them do not. In Austin, the Chapter 380 program is noticed through city council. There are other jurisdictions that don't give any public notice at all, just pass them. But there may potentially be an opportunity, depending on where you are, to advocate against these local tax and other financial incentives as well. And here is an example of Brazoria County last month rejecting a tax break for a $3 billion data center. Most of these tax breaks, like I said, going back, are on the order of like small tens of millions of dollars. But there are a couple that are over 100 million. There's one that's $271 million in tax breaks over 10 years. There I am again, much like I am here. Moving on to air quality impacts. Time was a couple of years ago when we were celebrating the closure of a coal plant every couple of months in Texas or elsewhere in the nation. That has slowed a little bit. I know we got a lot of coal killers here in the room. We've done some really great work over the last couple of decades. That progress has stalled, right? There were 15 coal plants whose lives were extended across the United States last year, right? Most of the new data centers, this is another read-bending slide, I'm not gonna read all these words, but most of them, if they are looking at building their own generation or looking at natural gas generation, there are about 40 gigawatts, that's 8 million homes worth of natural gas projects proposed directly tied to data centers. These are very large data centers that are going to have their own power in order to power their operations 24/7, 365, right? Mm-hmm. But they also have backup power, right? Especially if they're just tied into the grid, they will have diesel or gas turbines, diesel generators or gas turbines for backup power. You can see there's a facility out in El Paso that is proposing to use more than 800 natural gas turbines for backup power. If they are big enough, and they are getting big air permits, they have to go through some public process. There's notice and comment, there's opportunity for a public meeting, and what is called a contested case hearing, which is an administrative challenge to a permit that can slow a facility down by 6 months or more. Here's an example of a facility on the northeast side of San Antonio, this nice little patch of woods here. It is a facility that is proposing 65 diesel generators for backup power. That's a lot, right? So they are getting a major permit, and that comes with an opportunity for a public meeting. We got that public meeting. It is happening on May 28th. Thank you to Representative Philip Cortez for making the request so that that meeting can happen. I'm not going to get into air permitting, but it's a very complicated slide with lots of abbreviations on it, is telling us that there are different types of air permits, right? And the smaller ones up here on the top, your de minimis, that means you don't even need a permit. If I've got a Generac in the back of my home, right? So my home can be lily padded. I don't need an air permit for that, right? It's de minimis. If you're a little bit bigger, you're getting a permit by rule or a standard permit. It's just a paperwork exercise to tell the TCQ, I'm claiming this permit. TCQ is like, cool, we don't have enough staff to look at it anyway. And they just get it, right? If it's big enough, if it's over certain thresholds for air pollution, then they have to get major permits. And that is when the public participation opportunities come in, right? So we are looking at permit applications across the state. We are very concerned that there are a lot of facilities that are trying to permit themselves in this range, the non-public participation part, when they ought to be down here. How will they do this? A couple of different ways. Understate the number of hours that they're going to run the generators, or take one project and call it 2 projects with a little shell company that owns half. All right, that's called segmentation. So we are concerned that facilities are starting the permits that they need. This is something we hope the legislature looks into. There I am again, all over the place. All right. So let's talk a little bit about financing and some of the hiccups that have happened in high-profile projects over the last couple of months, and what is sometimes referred to as the imminent AI bubble. I really firmly believe that we are experiencing a bubble. When somebody tells me we're going to build 4 Texas's worth of electricity for an industry, I'm a little skeptical of that claim, right? Last year, GDP growth, about 5% of it was from the data center industry. 5% of the entire nation's growth from one industry. Seems like a bubble to me, all right? So we are seeing what happens when data center companies go bankrupt. They leave facilities in communities. This was a 49,000 square foot facility in Fort Worth that went bankrupt. You just abandoned the building, right? There was the Rellis campus. This was in Bryan, Texas. Rellis went bankrupt late last year. They actually found another buyer. The facility was already being built, and the community of Bryan said, you know what we need is a tax break for this facility that's obviously already coming to Bryan because the building is already being built. So they are considering a tax break in, I think, about the next week or so. So some of these things go bankrupt and then kind of bounce back. That is what is happening with the Oracle AI, OpenAI project. This is the one up in Abilene, the Stargate project, 4.5 gigawatts, 9 million homes worth of electricity, and 100,000 jobs, right? Even if you believe that those are construction jobs, I think that is a pretty unbelievable number. I heard a representative from the data center industry tell us at House State Affairs last week, every data center job supports 4.5 more jobs in the community. I don't know how that is, but anyway, 100,000 jobs. This project stalled, and Microsoft actually stepped in and said that they would take over that one. Rick Perry's project, Project Matador, has not been quite so successful. This was the company Fermi that had an initial public offering in October. The stock was about $32. Now it's $5. This is a giant facility. 93 gas turbines, over 5 gigawatts of demand. There were 300 public comments. Oops.
Where is that?
300 public comments received. So Matador is actually, oh gosh, where is this one? This one, it's in Amarillo, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Amarillo.
Thank you. Yeah,
And it's right next to the Pentex plant too.
that's right.
So that's another negative factor.
So you may have heard in February that Fermi laid off a bunch of construction workers. They had already started construction on this facility, despite the fact that they didn't have their permits. And they laid a bunch of people off in the beginning of February, and they cited timeline difficulties in acquiring the permits. This was a really odd decision because they laid people off in early February, and then about a week later, the TCQ decided on their contested case hearing. So again, that contested case hearing process, it'll slow a permit down for 6 months or more, right? If the contested case hearing is granted. If it's not granted by the TCQ because they don't think anybody is standing, well, then you just sail right through and get your permit. And that's what happened, right? The TCQ denied all of the contested case hearing requests and issued the facility's permit about a week after they laid everybody off and announced environmental permitting difficulties. So I'm not really sure what was going on there. They have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on consultants, but apparently it wasn't enough. So that's Project Matador, and here are some people laughing. Surely they just heard the news about Project Matador. And we are nearing the end of the prepared remarks here with this slide with a whole bunch of words on it. These are ideas for the Texas legislature. Some of these I've discussed with folks, some I have not, some of them you've already heard about here. Just gonna go through some of these really quickly. Limiting sales tax exemptions, lowering the threshold for who has to pay for transmission. We didn't get into SB6 and all that delightful stuff, but let's just say not enough of the large and mid-sized data centers will have to pay for their own transmission costs, which could increase costs for all of us. We talked about water use restrictions, good old-fashioned residential setbacks, noise. There is no state noise ordinance. So what I think they ought to do is create a model ordinance that cities could adopt that crucially includes infrasound, right? Sound that's below the range of human hearing, but still has health effects. Regulations on use of backup power, don't let them run their generators so that they can sell electricity or avoid transmission costs or things like that. Record keeping and reporting. We talked about air permitting. Non-disclosure agreements. These facilities are so hated in the communities that they're located in that they are getting non-disclosure agreements on the front end of negotiation, right? They'll give their company some innocuous name. It'll get noticed on the Planning and Zoning Commission, as just 123 LLC, right? People don't even know until after the land has been purchased, the zoning is done, that they're dealing with a data center. That is because of NDAs that are being signed. If we can't ban NDAs, how about prohibiting local tax incentives, tax breaks? If you're going to have an NDA, you're not going to be honest with the community. Why should they be being incentives? Rewrite state water plan, and so on and so forth. And then finally, give counties more control. Right? So these are some of the ideas we have started to discuss in the legislature. This list will be winnowed down and refined a whole lot before next year.
Can you get us a copy of that once it
Presume we could send these slides out. Right? Yeah, we could send the slides out afterwards.
Can I get you to stay at that? Okay. I'm quite an animal advocate. And I forget where it is, noise limits that include infrasound. And you said low frequency sound below the range of hearing humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
But don't forget that other species might be able to hear below what humans can hear.
Right.
So, I like to think that Sierra Club is sensitive to the impact on animals.
Yes, thank you. So the point was made, infrasound referring to below the range of human hearing, but animals might potentially have a wider range of hearing. We have seen this happening in Granbury, right? Those folks live next to a Bitcoin mine, Marathon Digital. It is very loud. It has this infrasound, and there have been impacts to livestock. Cheryl Shadden, a woman whose name you may have seen connected with the fight against crypto mining in the last couple of years, she has property adjacent to the mine. She has horses. At least one of her horses died. There was another gentleman who had a dog that suffered like heart attacks or something, some other kind of a stress-induced problem. There have absolutely been cases in Granbury of people whose livestock and pets and things have been impacted. So you are right to point that out. And
I'm impressed. How did the person whose horse died realize that it might have been because of this?
Yeah, so the question, how did that woman whose horse died know? Because she lived right next to the Bitcoin mine, and she heard not just the low frequency, but like audible sound too. And, frankly, her life and the lives, the quality of life of all of the people around her was greatly impacted by this facility. Everybody was dealing with problems all at once. And I think they kind of connected the dots because they were talking among each other.
And just to sort of throw this in, I had a conversation with Craig Nazer, just 2 nights ago. And we were talking about birds picking up on magnetic fields. And I have to think that this kind of thing would interrupt. Right here in Austin, we are part of the Central Flyway. And I just have to think that this could also interrupt birds.
I think you're absolutely right. There could be effects that are completely unknown to us at this point. And it should be pointed out, right? The claims that are made about infrasound and infrasound's impact on people's quality of life and on their livestock these claims are not universally accepted, right? It's not like there is a robust body of academic literature on this already. This is kind of on the front end of science of health impacts. So, there are people who will flatly disagree with you that this is a problem. I would just say that experience speaks for itself, right? These people in Granbury, nobody told us horses needed to be, concerned with infrasound, but here we are. Go ahead, please.
Now, I was going to say that in addition to the sound problem, there's also an enormous heat problem, and it's already pretty hot here in the summer. It throws off an enormous amount of heat, and the least we could ask for is that it be captured and used for something else. But it can, in the local area, raise the temperature by 40 degrees.
Right, I've seen some things recently talking, so we all know what the urban heat island effect is, right? But I have actually seen some things lately talking specifically about heat islands around these facilities, right? I mean, they are essentially giant computers. Computers heat up, right? And so the heat dissipation is one of the major resource inputs for the facility, right? It's either water or some other kind of liquid cooled. If it is air cooled, it's noisy and it's using a whole bunch of electricity. So there are trade-offs. I think there was another question or comment. Yeah, go ahead.
Business model for these things, it seems like on the front end, it's investors / speculators hoping for some sort of payoff. And then on the back end, I predict government bailouts, the Pentagon, how to keep up with the Chinese.
Right.
The middle of the trajectory. What is the revenue model? Is it all Google paying them?
So you were right about speculators in a lot of cases, right? A lot of these developers are essentially just real estate developers, right? And their goal is to build a warehouse, get the permits, secure the water and energy rights, and then lease their space to tenants, right? Who will actually be, companies that need the storage capacity, right? So one of the things that was talked about in the House State Affairs Committee last week was how do we separate the legitimate proposals from the speculators, from the ones that are never going to go anywhere. There were a variety of criteria that were floated, things like, you've actually got the land under contract, you've got a lease or you own the land. You actually have water, you have electricity. You're a company, not a company that's founded in October by Rick Perry, but a company that actually has a history of successfully completed construction development projects, right? There are all these indicia, incredibly, financial security, right, that you put up on the front end. So there was a discussion of all of these things. None of this is in place yet, right? So the PUC cannot tell the speculative fly-by-night company from the legitimate company. It doesn't have any mechanism to do that. But, again, I think for the most part, you're looking at facilities that are built and then leased, right, for cloud computing space. One of the first hiccups for the Oracle OpenAI project was that their first tenant, which had put up $150 million in earnest money, basically pulled out of the project because of delays. So
the 400 that was here before this boom, they were just people that needed a lot of computing.
Yeah, so again, we've had data centers, right? Data centers have been around for 20, 30 years, right? There's a couple of different types of uses for data centers. The first one is just like cloud-based storage, right? Just normal cloud computing. Another large use is crypto mining. Crypto mining actually uses computational power in order to mine Bitcoin, right? And the other big new use, of course, is artificial intelligence, right? Which is incredibly power hungry. Generally speaking, a data center, especially a large data center, is not going to be like one tenant or one type of use, right? So you're not going to see an AI data center necessarily. You're just going to see a data center that leases space to a whole range of tenants, right? Now, Bitcoin mines are a little different because the computers that mine Bitcoins, they're called ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits, and they are built strictly for the purpose of mining Bitcoin. They can't be reconditioned or whatever, repurposed into normal cloud storage or AI computing or whatever. They are only suitable for mining Bitcoin, right? So there's a bit of a difference there. But yeah, one more question. Okay.
One last. Is anyone trying to put pressure on Gemini, Claude, all these others? Because it seems like, the whack-a-mole problem, if they're the big buyers of this, that's fewer targets to pressure.
Yeah, right. So the question is there any pressure coming from the public to the very large developers, the like Sam Altmans of the world, I don't know. I mean, the most obvious way would be to not use the products, right? They're so incredibly integrated into our lives. There's probably very few people here who have like a Claude or a ChatGPT, actually downloaded that they're using. But every time you do a Google search, it does an AI search whether you want to or not, right? And every time you open your, email, it tries to summarize a 2-paragraph email for you, So whether we want to or not, this stuff is being crammed down our throats. I don't know if there is like directed, reasoned opposition pointed at some of those leaders. I mean, Sam Altman is the kind of guy that was telling us a while ago, well, there's energy cost investment in a human too, right? You have to spend 20 years feeding and raising one before they're productive. So, that kind of Machiavellian thinking doesn't strike me as somebody who we're going to reason with. Honestly, the best thing we can do is demonstrate that we don't want the products by not using them. Anyway, we're nearing the end of our talk. I think there's questions.
Go ahead and finish the end.
There's like one more slide. Yeah, I think I might actually be done. I can come back to this slide if you want to download our policy guide. You can actually find it on our website as well. Yeah, I think I'm pretty much, that is it.
Yeah, when